In terms of your research on school leadership, Alan Grossman, your friend and colleague, co-chairs with you the Public Education Leadership Project, a joint venture between the Harvard Business School and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Tell us about your work on this project.
That has been so interesting. Harvard is a place that's notorious for something that's called every tub on its own bottom, ETOB, where the schools historically have been very separate. You had to raise your own money. A school like the law school or the business school had very wealthy graduates and consequently had a very large endowment. A school like the education school or divinity school or public health had much smaller. So historically it has meant that it's been very, very hard to create collaborative work across the university. And so this was a program that nobody thought would really last, and we're actually in our 10th year. And it really brought together, Ellen has worked in nonprofit organizations. Outward Bound was his organization for a time, and so he's on the nonprofit side of the business school, but has been taught all the business principles. And they wanted to work with school districts and with school leaders. And we know something about that at the ed school and about the way schools are organized. And I had studied superintendents. And so we basically created this collaborative project. And I think we come up on our 10th year this summer, we have an intensive institute where we bring teams of 8 from large urban districts to work with us for a week. And it's a combination of teaching by the case method and facilitating their teamwork and a variety of speakers, and it's a kind of nonstop event. So Alan and I have co-chaired it, and then we have faculty from each school who are part of it. And in addition to that, we worked together to create a case book of the cases that we taught, and kind of tried to make it available in a context so that it could be used in classes for administrative preparation. And we're now working on a project where we're trying to understand and help explain to school district leaders, policymakers, the relationship between the central office and schools. The question about how much control over school level practice should come from the central office is one that's very important to school leaders. And in the past there have been these competing answers. You centralize everything and control it and prescribe everything and standardize practice. No, that's a problem, because the schools serve different communities. They need to be able to be responsive to the communities, and they're varied in what they do. So you have to be able to have them have more autonomy. And so then there would be proposals for complete autonomy within a district. You give the budget, curriculum authority to the schools and let them work. So under accountability, this has become very important. So we have been studying several districts, 5 districts, all of which won the Broad Prize. So they have been recognized as exemplary districts. And we've been trying to understand that question. How do they think about what the central office both offers and requires, and what do they think about the schools? And so we've interviewed people in the schools and in the central office, and we're just analyzing data now. We're going to be writing a book about that. So we work together in a lot of ways. But the thing is that we have been one of these collaborative groups that has lived on. And I think both schools and the deans in both schools realize that there's great benefit to this beyond just the work that we do directly with the districts.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting also with your case study approach, because that is more rare than common.
Right.
You also did a lot of research on the experiences of novice or new teachers. Talk about that.
Well, this has been work that we started in 1998, and that's when I started the project on the next generation of teachers, along with, at that time, a group of 4 doctoral students. I had been academic dean for 6 years, and I was going back to teaching, and I thought, I really want to work in a different way with my doctoral students. I want to have a collaborative project rather than advising an array of dissertations about a whole range of topics. And so I decided to, with them, to start this project. They basically said, we want to work with you, we want to work together, and we want to do something about teachers. And so we spent actually about, 10 months in just a kind of informal seminar reading. I wanted them to read all the basics and looking at topics. And about that time, my daughter had graduated, was graduating from college, and she'd gone to a liberal arts college. And it was before the technology bubble burst, and everybody she knew was getting job offers for these phenomenal jobs and everything.
Sure.
And she never intended to be a teacher at all. We have a video of her when she was about 7, and we kind of interviewed the kids as they were growing up, to watch that. And I said, what do you think you'll be in? And she said, I think I'll be a poetess or a psychologist. Now, my husband, her dad, is a psychologist. She didn't really know much about, she wasn't going to be a teacher. I think that was the clear message for me. So she interviewed with different, recruiters that came to campus. I bought her a nice little jacket to wear to her interview. She told me recently she never wore it. But nothing really interested her, these consulting management groups, whatever. And Teach for America came.
Yeah.
And so she signed up. And at that point I thought, this is how children rebel.
Yes. What am I
is
going
my
to say to
world.
my friend?
I am a professor in an education school, and she doesn't need me. So anyway, at that time, then I realized, okay, 30 years ago, I started teaching. And this is so interesting because I never thought about another line of work, nor did virtually anyone I went to college with.
Sure.
It was some of my colleagues in college, or friends in college, classmates, went to law school, and some went to medical school, but it was a fairly small number. And we expected to be teachers for life. That was the women's movement was very strong, and so we were going to work, and we were going to be teachers. And these other careers hadn't opened up really at that point. So when I looked at that labor market and then the labor market of new teachers today, I thought, this is really fascinating. They can do whatever they want. Here was my daughter beginning to be a teacher, and I thought, I really want to know what her cohort thinks about teaching. Why are they there? They could do anything. Is it about teaching itself, really? And how do they think about this when their classmates are going to get jobs that are, they're going to promote them very quickly, they're going to earn a lot of money, they're going to have comfortable places to work, the photocopy machine will work, all the things. So that was the beginning of it. And we started this study. We started by interviewing 50 first and second year teachers from all were public schools, some were charter schools at that time. And really just asking all these questions. Why are you teaching? What do you expect? What are your concerns? Tell us who your colleagues are. Whom do you talk to? Just all the same kinds of questions about their workplace. And we were hearing from people that they did not expect to stay in teaching. And if they expected to stay in education, they thought they would do something else. Now, this was, 98, 99. So many of them told us that they were going to become instructional coaches. And that was before many schools had instructional coaches. They actually didn't know anyone who held that job, but they thought that that would be the next step. They didn't see themselves being in a classroom for the long term. And I just thought the public schools are not ready for this because they're expecting a generation like mine
Sure.
to come in and stay. You give me a job and I'll stay. And suddenly we were starting to see they are not staying. And they, even when they came in, they had one eye on the door, you know? So we were really trying to understand what makes a difference. And what again just became very clear was that for new teachers, if things didn't work for them in their school, they were gone. Many of them had no interest in looking for a better school if that first year or two didn't work out well. Some did, but it had to happen at the school. And it had to, things like, many of them had no curriculum. I was stunned because we had accountability in the state, and these were all Massachusetts teachers at the time. We had accountability. I thought surely they have an oppressive reading program that they'll complain about or something. Lots of them didn't. Or they would say, I have a math curriculum. I don't have anything in science. I don't know. Someone showed me the book room. I have to go by the book. They got very little meaningful orientation. They had very little mentoring of any sort, formal or informal, although that did gradually change. Actually, within the state at that point, they were required to have mentors. And we would say, so, do you have a mentor? And first, so many of them didn't. And then the ones that did will say, I have a mentor. Yeah, I have a mentor. And then you'd say,
My title.
Right. What do you and your mentor do? Well, most of the time I only see her when we're passing in the corridor. And she'll say, you're all right.
How are things going?
Things are okay, right? So there were, when it worked, it was magic. You know, people were very excited. But I've come to say that, you know, it's kind of expecting something to work in an intense kind of way that really depends on a match that schools cannot make. And when you think about the divorce rate in this country, you know, and the effort that goes into making good matches there, we shouldn't be surprised when it falls apart in schools. So one of the things that we learned was that the important thing was not to have one person who was responsible for you, because when that happens, other teachers back off.
Sure.
If I'm Audrey's new teacher, then, you know, Jane down the hall might be able to help me, but the way teachers work, she wouldn't intervene. And I, as a new teacher, am supposed to expect that you're the person who will guide me. What we found was that when teachers were involved in what we called an integrative professional culture, where the norm was that these are all our teachers. We have responsibility for our new teachers and for our students. It tended to be a kind of culture issue that went through the school. Then teachers pretty quickly got engaged in how we do things here, who's good at what, you know, what are the questions to ask this person or that person.
A very holistic perspective on that.
Yeah, then you get engaged with the faculty as opposed to being a novice who's very limited in what you can learn.
We can learn a lot from that in higher education too,
yes.
in terms of mentoring junior faculty.
Yes, absolutely.
We have a very traditional approach to that.
That is so interesting to me, because one of the things that we learned was these people never have the chance to watch anyone else teach. And sometimes they did in student teaching, but again, it was kind of one person. And the best induction program I saw was one that released the new teachers from an administrative duty, you know, cafeteria duty, bathroom duty, 1 day a week, so 1 hour a week to go observe another teacher. And they had some guidance. This person is really good with people who speak out of turn in class. Go watch her. And it was just eye-opening. And once you see all those people, then you feel, okay, I can ask. So I think about that a lot in higher education, because, you know, it's a challenge to get people to watch each other teach. And yet when we do it, wonderful.
It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's a time challenge, and so
Right.
this work that you did, this research, this is from the project of the next generation of teachers.
Right.
And this ultimately inspired your book, I believe, The Finders and Keepers.
Right. Finders and Keepers was based on these 50 teachers. We started with it just being an exploratory case, and my former doctoral students would laugh at that because exploratory, suddenly their ambitions outstripped mine. They wanted to go to AERA and deliver conference papers, and so we did 50 interviews. We divided them up, and we did 50 interviews by, I think it was December, and we had, of course, written a proposal for something we hadn't finished yet, which is convention. And so we then divided it up, and we wrote one paper about the role of curriculum, one about colleagues, one about hiring. I think we had at that point, anyway, we had 4 papers. We were all co-authors, and each of them took the lead on one of them. And then we realized these people are really interesting, and we're interested in retention, so let's keep in touch with them. And so we followed them over 4 years, and we would do follow-up phone interviews, and really we tracked who stayed, who went, why. And it was very interesting. Out of the 50, after 4 years, about a third had left public school teaching. About a third had transferred to a new school, and a third stayed in their original schools. And that was fairly close to the national, it's a qualitative study. We chose the people. We couldn't see it in any way as being generalizable. But it really did reflect that pattern. And one thing we learned was the people who changed schools, who transferred, were lost to that original school as much as if they'd left to become a lawyer. In other words, when you lose a teacher from your school, it doesn't really matter if they're across town. That may matter to the district that they've retained you. But at the school, if you leave after 2 or 3 years, you're just beginning to really understand the school. You're about to take leadership in the school. And so there's some very interesting work that Ron Felt and Loeb have done out of Stanford about the organizational consequences of these kinds of transfers, and students pay a price. So that question of, people always want to talk about the leavers and the who stays, who leaves, the profession, but the problem is not so much the profession as it is this kind of rapid turnover, especially in the highest need schools.
Now, was your daughter Erica a part of this book?
No.
Okay.
She was what my students called the FDP, our favorite data point, because we would talk about these things, and then I would talk to her, and I would say, "What do you think about this?" And then, so she was kind of an outside voice on this. All of the doctoral students had been teachers, so they were, not many years older than the people we were studying, but it was a bit of a different time for them.
Sure.
And so no, she was just the beginner that we talked about.
And you said that she went through the TFA program.
She did. She taught in a community in California, very high poverty, high immigrant student population. She was assigned to teach first grade bilingual. Now, she had been an anthropology major. She'd done a lot of English courses. She had had Spanish through high school. She had had very good Spanish through high school, but she was not fluent in Spanish. She used to say, "I'm fluent at a first grade level."
Sure.
She knew nothing about teaching reading, and it really, alarmed me.
Yes.
So we spent a lot of time. We spent a lot of time on the phone. I went to my colleagues who know a lot about literacy and got materials, and her kids learned to read, but it didn't strike either of us as the best way for her to begin teaching for her or for her students. So she stayed in that school for 3 years, and then she went on and did a master's in in literacy.
And she's a doctoral student at Stanford now.
She is a
right?
doctoral student at Stanford now, but she taught for, I think, 7 years.
7 years.
So, yeah.
She was retained for a while. What is she
Right.
studying in her doctoral program?
She's studying literacy.
Oh, she is?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so she came full circle, back to what Mom...
Well, no, we kind of say literacy's different than what I study.
Okay.
No, but that's been fun.
So has her experiences changed your perspective in terms of alternative routes to teaching?
Well, I'm very interested in alternative routes, and as I said to you, I realized that mine
You
was an
yourself?
alternative program. Different, long, still 2 years, but
Yeah.
in many ways
Sure.
has some of the same issues. I think Teach for America has been very successful in recruiting into education people who would not be there otherwise. Many of my students have been through Teach for America, and they're amazing and they're interested in wonderful things. I have always had concerns about a program where the expectation is that people are there for a short time. And we actually have done, Morgan Donaldson did research in the project about how long Teach for America teachers stay, and it actually is longer than most people realize. And so I think that that program, I know, has grown enormously in the support that it provides for teachers. But I also think that it could do more to encourage those teachers to work on changing the school outside their classroom. The commitment is very much to their students and to their academic progress, which is great. But I think this turnover piece still is serious. I mean, it's not 2 years, but it's not 5 years either. I mean, people aren't staying for a very long time. And often, although they stay in teaching, they often change schools after their 2 years in their high poverty school. So that part of things concerns me. Teach for America has become the model for many alternative programs, and they are often being run on a shoestring, whereas Teach for America actually has tremendous resources. And so some of the copycat programs are pretty weak. We studied a number of them, not Teach for America, quite deliberately. We're looking at other programs.
District-based ones.
District-based, some university special programs, all kinds of programs. And what was interesting was how attractive the quick route to the classroom was, particularly for people who were changing careers. That the idea that they could do this without going through a longer teacher ed program, the opportunity costs, the financial costs of that were seen as a barrier to them. But many of them, we interviewed the teachers while they were in the programs in the summer, and then about 7 or 8 months later. And many of them felt that they just really weren't prepared, especially the ones that were placed in the most challenging settings. Because the idea of alternative prep is often that you expect the school to become the support that the preparation program, didn't provide. But very often, the schools that have the most difficulty hiring well-prepared teachers are taking the folks who are going on the fast track programs, and those schools just don't have enough resources, personal, professional, financial, to actually provide the time for support. So there's tremendous variation in alternative programs, and I think the effect of them has been that more traditional programs have had to think very hard about how they expect students to spend time in their programs. That endless education courses that are mindless or repetitive or low level just are unacceptable. Also, that the clinical part of student teaching and experience in the schools is very, very important. So I think more so-called traditional programs are looking more like some of the alternative programs. And then there are the teacher residency programs, which the Boston Teacher Residency was the first of those, and I've followed that pretty closely. That's alternative, but actually the first year of the program, they co-teach with a regular teacher in a classroom, and then have additional coursework and a lot of support. So the idea of alternative and traditional, it's very hard to say what's what anymore.
Yeah, because they're blending.
Right.
They're blending from
They've
one
become
another.
hybrids, kind of on both sides. You see.
Same at our university as
Yep,
well.
yep.
You said something earlier about the principles that you found most effective in your research are typically the ones that had backgrounds in teaching and understood the complexities of teaching. So this question to you, having a background as a teacher, how has that informed you as a scholar, a better scholar, a scholar with more street cred?
That's funny because when I first went to Harvard as a doctoral student, I had it in my head that I would leave behind everything I knew. I mean, I hadn't, not deliberately, but that was no longer relevant. And it took almost a year for me to realize that I was at a school of education, that many of the faculty in that school had not been in a public school since, either since they were students or many people teaching a year or two.
Sure.
And I started to realize that not that it would give me particular credibility with them, because I don't think they at that time saw it as particularly valuable, but that I had some understanding of this place and these people that I wanted to study. So I started then to think back, the schools I knew, the teachers I knew. It became, like this golden resource for me of understanding. I do know that when I speak to professional groups, it's very important to them that I've worked in a school for more than a little bit of time. And I try to make it very apparent as I talk that I know their world, even though I know that I haven't taught under accountability, So the other thing is just the teaching itself. I mean, there is this ridiculous belief based on value-added numbers that people get better for a few years as teachers and then plateau. And you can see it happening. My explanation for that is that yes, you get better for a few years because you have your kids there and you kind of use your own resources to do the best you can to get better at it. If you're teaching in a school where you never see anyone teach, where the professional development is dry and distant, it's hard to get better. If you're not well supervised, and very, very few teachers have good supervision. So I can understand how you plateau, but this notion that for some reason teachers, unlike any other professional group, don't get better over time is really absurd. Alan Grossman at the business school and I were talking about this once, and he said that's laughable. How could any business survive that believed that? So I just know that in my own teaching, I'm much better now. Yesterday I was much better than I was 30 years ago. And so that part of it, I see a real continual kind of development just in the teaching part.
Sure.